So we have this wonderful topic from self-judgment to self-forgiveness. And I have to say, I think I've become a bit of an expert in this topic of self-judgment simply because I have applied it to myself in so many ways, in my journey of life, but also in my journey of spirituality. And I was just thinking back at some of the moments where I have really judged myself so harshly in life. And one of these moments came when I was very young in school, and I was never really academic as a pupil. I never really enjoyed academia as such. And everyone else around me seemed to very much enjoy it. And I always felt there was something wrong with me because I just could never excel. And it's funny how, when the system and our conditioning and our upbringing makes you feel that success is one way, you can begin to see yourself through that and begin to feel like a failure, begin to feel like you're not enough. And also begin to feel like you're not able to fulfill the expectations of others, like my parents. And that weighed very heavily on me, I have to say, especially because in my family, everyone was an A-grade student, and I just didn't happen to be. But it was much later that I had the opportunity to work at a very young age. And it's funny how I really flourished when I was thrown into a environment. Sure, I will speak very slowly yet. Thank you for reminding me. I forgot. Okay. So I was, as I was saying, I was in a work environment. I had chosen to cut my education a little bit short and try a different option. And I happened to really enjoy myself, and it's almost like I could throw myself into something in a different way, where I could really apply myself practically. And I look back at my life and I realized that actually the world will tell you to be a certain way, but actually your path is your path, and how you're wired, situations will come to emerge that speciality and that quality inside of you. And self-judgment simply creates a blocker to me progressing in life. But it's also an opportunity and gives me a way to really learn about myself. And I was very encouraged when I started to take up work and be very successful at it, simply because I realized that actually I'd been judging myself very harshly on the basis of what I thought success was, or what I was brought up to believe what success was. And so that showed me that I have this trait of self-judgment inside of me, but also that I needed to work on that. And coming to the Brahma Kumaris, I felt it wasn't just a removal of self-judgment. If anything, it probably increased even more, because I found that I was struggling to really apply and follow the lifestyle. And I would really put myself under an immense amount of pressure. And as a result, feel tremendous feelings of guilt and shame as a result of not being able to follow, kind of some of the teachings, and not being spiritual enough. And so I think it takes a bit of maturity and a bit of time to really begin to get to know the self at a deeper level, and to understand how damaging self-judgment can truly be. One of the things I recognize about this topic of self-judgment is that it is simply anger turned inside. And when anger is turned inside, it not only absolutely destroys your spiritual stage and power, but it leaves you completely deflated, and it wears your self-esteem, your self-faith, your self-confidence completely down. And it takes time, I feel, on this journey to really get to know yourself with the depth of honesty. And the more we can really learn about ourselves and check ourselves, we can be compassionate with ourselves. Without understanding who we are, we can't truly be compassionate with ourselves. So this idea of self-forgiveness will never become a reality when we're holding so much self-rejection and self-judgment. And that's what self-judgment is for me. It is a form of self-rejection, and the feelings that are created as a result of self-judgment can actually sit inside of us and stay with us for such a long period of time. And I know I've had that when I haven't truly been able to face my inner world and understand what it is I'm feeling and why I'm feeling that. And sometimes, you know, it's easy for somebody to say, go and meditate when you're not feeling particularly good about yourself, without realizing that meditation actually isn't always the answer. And I have to say, this is what I've learned about my own journey, that we can have an idea and experience of the true self and realize that we are much more than the suffering self. But sometimes in our suffering, when we try and meditate, things become worse. We begin to project a lot of those feelings internally, begin to project into our minds. And that can leave us very contained with negative energy inside of us that we can't seem to shift, we can't seem to change, and we can't seem to release in any way until we've actually done some work to really see ourselves with truth. And I have to say that for a long time, and this is me being completely honest with you, for a long time I felt that my spiritual journey and change in my spiritual journey has really come from the feelings of guilt and shame. And that's not necessarily the right way to approach your spiritual journey, because often when we make mistakes, those feelings sit with us and you want to try and put them right, and you change your behavior as a result of feeling guilt and shame. But actually, when we're constantly evaluating ourselves in this way, and it leads us to feel shame, and it leads us to change our behavior on the basis of shame and guilt, then actually our learning and growing is only coming from self-hatred. And this is the one thing I've realized, is that when I hate myself, and, you know, guilt can say I've done something wrong, but shame speaks in a very damaging way. It says I am worthless. It says I am deeply flawed and worthless. And sometimes it takes years to really acknowledge that I'm living in shame, and I'm living with this deep feeling of shame. And that's kind of somehow guiding and creating those self-judgments and those thoughts about myself. And this is one of the bigger realizations I feel I've had on this journey, that a lot of these deeper feelings that sit within the heart actually begin to project these thoughts that we can't control about ourselves. And these thoughts repeatedly keep coming up and keep reminding us, and we believe them. And I know that was the case for me until I started doing the inner work of cleansing my heart. And I feel that this is such a big topic, and we'll come to this aspect of self-forgiveness. But when we talk about the topic of the heart, particularly we talk about a place where there are deep feelings that take place. And deep feelings could be feelings of love. Deep feelings could be feelings of hate. They could be very negative deep feelings, feelings of shame, feelings of regret. These are deep, deep feelings. And when these deep feelings exist inside of us, they actually begin to sabotage everything around us, and particularly our thinking. And sometimes, yes, we can change our thinking literally by observing it and transforming it. But other times, we have to actually work at a deeper level. We have to understand the root of some of these feelings that are just sitting inside of me like a blanket. They're just constantly there. They're always present, and they don't necessarily make me feel happy, but they begin to manifest themselves in these types of thoughts that say, I hate myself, or thoughts that say, I could be better. I should be doing things so much better than this, being hard on myself. So in this way, self-judgment creates such a destructive internal state that it can shatter us completely. And, the interesting thing about feelings of guilt and feelings of shame is when we are vibrating at that sort of level, then actually people pick up those feelings. For example, if I think some of us would may have received flowers on the basis of guilt. When somebody's guilty and they buy flowers and then they share them with you, something about that gift makes you immediately know that actually you're giving this out of guilt. And so it's never received with appreciation. As human beings, or as souls embodied in human bodies, we are vibrations, constantly sharing in vibration mode. And so if there are tinges of guilt in our interaction, they are picked up very easily. And so our actions are not necessarily, are less likely to be appreciated if they come from a space of guilt or shame, rather than if they are purely motivated to contribute to somebody's life. And so that's an interesting thing to think about, because often when these feelings sit inside of us and we share with others, people can pick these feelings up from us in whatever form we decide to share. And I think one of the biggest words, there is an enormous word that has the power to create a lot of guilt and shame. And bear with me a second. I'm just going to look at, okay. Has enormous power to create shame and guilt, basically. And this is a common word that we use to really evaluate ourselves. And it's so deeply ingrained in our consciousness that probably many of us would have trouble imagining how to live without it. And does anybody know what this word is? I'll wait for the chat. And if you could just note it in English. So there's a common word, and a word with enormous power to create shame and guilt inside. We use it very regularly towards ourselves. What is this word? If anyone has any ideas. Someone's saying pucker, need, disappointment, guilt, conscience, self-pity. Yes, interesting. Okay. So someone has said should, and that's absolutely spot on. This word should, it has an enormous potential to create feelings. And someone is also saying, why didn't I? And that's very, very valid, because this word should, I should have known better. I shouldn't have said that. I should have done this, or I should have done that, or I shouldn't have done this. I should have been better than this. This word should resists learning, because it really implies that there is no choice. And I feel that as human beings, when we hear any kind of demand on ourselves, then we tend to resist. I don't know about you, but I know I resist, because it threatens our autonomy. It threatens our need for choice. And where there is should, there is absolutely no choice. And so this is the one thing I feel that I'm learning and still learning about myself when I use should towards myself. And that's an interesting thing, again, just to think about, when, what is it that creates these feelings of guilt and shame inside of me deeply? And sometimes we need certain tools to really help us see clearly what is happening in our inner world. And I'll come to some of these tools when we're talking about self-forgiveness. But I just wanted to share a little bit more on this topic of deep feelings, particularly in relation to this topic of should, and how feelings of guilt, specifically when we make a mistake, creates, a sense that I deserve to be punished in some way. And I know in my journey, I have punished myself in such a harsh way, simply by turning these thoughts towards myself repeatedly without addressing them. And I think there's always a moment when we can do this to ourselves for a short period of time and realize. But then there are times in our life we can do this for a long period of time on ourselves, and it actually wears us down completely, that we haven't got any ability to respond to situations or to respond to our inner needs with any sort of power or strength. And this is where I feel I've had to do a lot of work on cleansing the heart. And this is a big topic that I know some of you who are aware of Dadi Janki, who used to be the administrative head of the Brahma Kumaris. She used to speak regularly about cleansing the heart, particularly with these deep feelings, and really acknowledging them and really surrendering them in your connection and relationship with the divine. And sometimes on this journey of self-forgiveness, we have to begin the process of self-realization, because unless we realize the magnitude of our mistake, we can't change it. We can't bring about that transformation in ourselves. And realization it requires such a level of truth and honesty within the self that it takes time to see, and it takes patience to see, but it requires time to myself. And I know some of the work that I've done on myself has taken a lot of silence, a weekend of silence, or even weeks of silence, to really unearth, because often we neglect what's happening in our hearts and the pain that's in our hearts by keeping our minds, keeping our senses very stimulated and busy, so that we're not having to face what is in our hearts. And the pain and suffering that we carry in our hearts simply sits there and diminishes any inner power and inner strength that we have. And the challenge with that, obviously, is we're not able to truly let go of any mistakes, or particularly the burden of any mistakes. So when we feel guilty and we have floods of waste thoughts coming, we can't control those thoughts because they stem from guilt. And only seeing what I'm going through with truth will really allow me to realize what it is I need to change about myself. And I remember one particular situation where I really struggled. I was in a position where I had to help somebody who hadn't really taken care of their affairs in a particularly appropriate way. So that burden of responsibility fell on me. And this individual was about to die. And I found it overwhelming to have to look after this individual as well as to tie up their affairs. And I'd made a few mistakes because I've never done anything like it. But I remember how much I judged myself for making those mistakes so severely that I found so much fear inside of me emerging at what would happen as a consequence of my mistakes. And I had to go through a process of really just acknowledging what feelings I was having internally. And I realized that as I started writing about it, because writing became a very useful way for me to just express everything that I was feeling inside of me. And as I started to write, I realized that one of the biggest feelings that I was holding in this situation was regret. And it's funny, I to this day, I look at what I'd written and there was some amazing things that came out, that poured out from the heart. And one of them was, I didn't ask for help and I really needed to. And this is a deep insight, when we feel regret in any situation and we judge ourselves incredibly harshly, we can not forgive ourselves until we're able to see what's happening in our hearts with clarity. And one of the other things I wrote was that I haven't really fully forgiven myself because I haven't truly understood the massive lesson that I have to learn from all of this. And so it was interesting for me just to begin to acknowledge what my heart wanted to say rather than what my mind was fearing. And, I had to acknowledge that I wasn't diligent enough. I hadn't really considered the magnitude of my responsibility. Everything worked out. The reality was everything worked out in that situation. So a lot of the thoughts and fears that were eating me up didn't manifest themselves in a real way. And, the start of self-forgiveness for me was approaching and acknowledging everything in my heart with crystal clarity. Because unless we're really able to start this inner dialogue with the heart, we're not truly able to acknowledge the feelings that we're holding inside. And these feelings disrupt the way we think, disrupt the way we address, we lose confidence as a result of our thinking, purely because we're holding on to heavy, heavy feelings inside. And so this journey of self-forgiveness starts with an immense amount of kindness towards the self, coupled with a brutal amount of honesty in the self. And I know this has been a really important topic, particularly when we're trying to understand, what are the steps that we can take in order to really start to learn lessons rather than to punish ourselves as a result of self-judgment. Because where there is self-judgment, there is no learning. Sometimes we can think we are being honest with ourselves, but we're not, because when we're being honest with ourselves, there will be a feeling of lightness. But when we see our mistakes and we think we're being honest with ourselves, but it makes us feel down about ourselves, then we are judging ourselves. So sometimes we have to see ourselves and recognize that if we're making mistakes and we think we're being honest with ourselves, but we're feeling low about ourselves, then that is only self-judgment. And so that's an important aspect to consider, because where there is a feeling of realization, there is a feeling of liberation inside. There is a feeling of, oh my God, lightness. The sense that I can't believe I have been behaving this way, and I can understand and see clearly where I'm absolutely going wrong. And realization starts with silence. I feel that's one of the biggest steps to beginning the journey to self-forgiveness. Without getting to the roots of some of these issues that we're facing, we can't truly forgive ourselves. And one of the things that I've learned to appreciate at the Brahma Kumaris is that the power of realization starts with an inner connection with myself. Simply to see that I am the suffering self, or the ego, won't allow me to solve these issues, solve any mistakes that I'm making. I will only ever approach them from a low consciousness. And the thing about low consciousness is, I can't remember, was it Einstein that said, no problem can ever be solved at the same level that it was created. And so if I'm beginning to assess myself and my mistakes from an egoic consciousness, a lower consciousness, then I will find myself only confused. I will find myself not able to resolve the issue that I'm facing, and I will find myself increasing the level of waste thoughts that appear in my mind. As maybe some of you can relate to this. Anyone being in a situation where you might have made a mistake, you're probably judging yourself, and there is a flood of waste that's taking place in your mind, and you can't control it. You keep thinking about it again and again and again. Has anyone experienced that? I'm sure most of us, if not all of us, have experienced that many, many times. Regularly, people are saying yes many times. And that is a sign that at the level of the ego, I'm beginning to analyze situations. And when I'm trapped in analysis from a point of suffering, I cannot resolve situations. And so this is an important thing to check. Am I analyzing a situation, or am I in a mode of reflecting? And for reflection to take place, there needs to be detachment. And detachment comes when I'm able first to connect with the higher self. When I'm able to raise my consciousness, then detachment from whatever situation or problem or whatever aspects of my past that I need to see clearly become distant. I'm able to see it with the lens of pure observation. And I use this term pure observation because when we're in this state of higher consciousness, then the feelings that are with us at that point really are feelings of peace, feelings of love, feelings of total acceptance. And those feelings begin to guide us, begin to show us what we need to see with truth. They allow our inner truth to start working for us. And so silence becomes the first entry point to self-forgiveness, because it allows us to raise our consciousness so that we can be detached, so that we can apply a pure observation to whatever it is we need to see clearly in our lives. And sometimes the overthinking mind will definitely begin to calm down, and the problem hasn't gone away. The situation is still there, but now it doesn't affect me like it used to. And I'm not judging myself unfairly or critically as a result of it. And I'm able to then see the roots of my thinking. And I feel that this is the key in order for us to create change. This is the key in order for us to begin the process of realization. And without that step of detachment, I'm not able to see truthfully. And I remember a time when I was judging a few others in my life very harshly. Often when we find ourselves judging ourselves, we will really be taking it out. So our self-anger will be really launched towards others. We will be judging others in a very harsh way. And often that becomes a sign for me to see where it is I'm judging myself. And I recognized as I went through this process of reflection that their anger was only triggering my own inner anger. And so judging others and judging myself were very, very linked. And as I was able to see the roots of why I was judging them, I realized two things. One is that I would find myself drawn to their defects and weaknesses. And when my attention is drawn to their defects and weaknesses, then it would only create thoughts of irritation inside of me. And I would hold those thoughts in my awareness each time I would see them. And so therefore I would be holding, and I use this term, stamp of negativity. I would create a stamp of negativity towards others. And that is an interesting hold that we put people under when we're judging them. We put them under a stamp of negativity simply because we're seeing something about them that doesn't align to our values. And when I was noticing that, I recognized that actually I was only increasing my own inner anger. So they weren't responsible for the way I felt. My own thinking and my own vision was responsible for the way I feel. And you know, that this is another big lesson I feel that I've learned on the path of spirituality, is that other people are not responsible for the way I feel. But we're conditioned like this since childhood, you know, where maybe our parents speak to us and say something along the lines of, you know, if you don't do your homework, that will upset me. And, you know, we then begin to think that actually, you know, other people are responsible for the way we feel because we've been conditioned this way. And this conditioning doesn't just appear in this birth. It's probably a conditioning we've been carrying for many births. So it's very, very deeply entrenched. I wanted to just do a bit of an experiment with all of you as well. I'm just going to share an image on screen. Bear with me. And I'd like to invite your comments in terms of what you see. Okay, so everyone can see that. So feel free to comment on what you observe in there. Yeah. Yeah, a few of you know this. A very interesting experiment that Einstein did, actually, and it fascinated me because I think the story goes he had asked the classroom, you know, he put this up in front of everyone, and clearly 9 out of 10 is not 91, it's 90. But that was the one that everyone's attention was drawn to, that one mistake, rather than the 10 other ones that he managed to get correct. And so this aspect of seeing mistake and seeing mistakes within us is such a strong habitual tendency that we don't necessarily realize how damaging it can be to our self-esteem and self-value, because it destroys all aspect of what is good and valuable inside of us. And when we begin to delve into our mistakes, we lose all aspect of value inside of us. We begin to see defects only. And this is an interesting dimension of suffering, I feel. When we suffer internally, because of something we've done, because of, a situation we're facing, we begin to lose our own sense of value, because whatever emotions and whatever thoughts that are affecting us actually begin to completely consume us. And this example was an interesting one because, turned inside, it's exactly the same. We feel bad. Exactly. Someone's just said, I feel bad when I've made a mistake. And so it's such an interesting experiment to see within ourselves is, what am I drawn to when I'm suffering? And often I'll be drawn to a defect or a mistake that I've made, and I will punish myself for that mistake. And in punishing myself from that mistake, I will forget all of my value, everything that I've done that has been beneficial, that has been positive, that has been uplifting. And I will hold on to that one mistake because the consciousness of the ego is so powerful. And this is why when we begin to do any reflective work on ourselves on the path of spirituality, we have to start with upliftment. We have to start with love. Because if we don't start with love, we will always start assessing ourselves from our mistakes. We become mistake conscious. We begin to judge ourselves on the basis of our mistakes. And then from that, we begin to create belief systems about ourselves that we hold on to in our lives. So belief systems could be, I'm not good enough, or I always get things wrong. And these unknown belief systems just get lodged in our awareness and in our minds, and they don't shift. They disrupt our thinking. They affect us in different situations. And so when we're talking about the journey to self-forgiveness and the steps to self-forgiveness, one of the first steps is really to begin to see my value, and to start by acknowledging and appreciating the self. I just wanted to share a very simple framework for self-forgiveness. And I feel that there's two ways that we can really approach self-forgiveness. The one is at a very practical level, that is straightforward. And the other is a much more subtle and deep level of effort that needs to be applied. And so at the first level, I simply just have to realize that I have done something wrong. And, guilt can come in two forms. There can be a helpful form of guilt, which is a sign that my conscience is biting. So I've broken my truth in some way, and my conscience is simply alerting me to that. And that helpful form of guilt can be seen as a signal that can help me to check and change myself. The other form of guilt is an unhelpful form of guilt, which is when we can, assess ourselves against unrealistic expectations. So, we've all perhaps been in a situation, in our lives where perhaps, we've had a sense that we've forgotten somebody's name, as an example, and we feel guilty as a result of that. Or perhaps we should have said something and we didn't, and we feel guilty. Or perhaps we didn't acknowledge somebody and we feel guilty. So we can set very high expectations and unrealistic expectations and measure ourselves against that, and that can create feelings of guilt. So they can be very unhelpful. So sometimes we have to realize that I've done something wrong. And that internal checking is helpful in order for us to assess that. And if we've honestly realized the mistake, then we can move on from it. Because when there's honest realization internally, we are free. When we are free in our minds, that mistake won't pull us, because realization brings a sense of learning. And this is where we can either choose to continue to feel guilty, or we can learn a lesson from it. And the challenge with guilt is when the soul is flooded with feelings of guilt, it also is flooded with an unstoppable flow of waste thoughts. And this is what depletes our inner power. And when we're in a state of depletion, in a state where we cannot we're not able to retain power, we're not then able to let go. So we all know that in order to let go of something, we use this term, the power to let go, because there needs to be some power in order to let go of something. And often we don't realize that the longer we hold on to something, the heavier it becomes. And as it begins to wear us down, that suffering doesn't allow us to let go until we've charged again. And so realization is the first step. And when I'm seeing that I'm constantly flooded with unnecessary thoughts, then there are certain things that we can do to really help us. One is to make sure that we're not too much on our own. I feel that this is a valuable thing when I'm feeling, very down about myself, when there's a lot of feelings of shame and guilt emerging. Then it's important to not be alone with my thoughts. And having good company is key. Is really key to protecting myself from my thoughts. The next thing we can do is kind of somehow inject some spirituality into our mistake. And this is when we begin to realize that actually there is some value inside of us. And if I'm able to seek some spiritual guidance towards my mistake, then I'm able to put some freshness into it. And this is the freshness that allows me to create hope inside, because there now is a different perspective at looking at this situation. And that then creates interest to move forward. And so at this level, we can begin to deal with deal with forgiving the self. Another aspect is sometimes we can continue punishing ourselves unnecessarily for feeling guilty. But actually, a simple way is for us to just do something right. So rather than keep repeating in our minds what we've done wrong, like in a tape recorder, as soon as we stick a tape cassette in, we can re-record it. If something hasn't recorded correctly, then we can also have a re-recording. And basically, a re-recording means simply perform an action that is elevated, that is good, because that creates value in the soul. And I have to say that we will make many mistakes in our lives, but we will also perform very many good deeds in our lives as well. And when we occupy ourselves by creating this sanskara or a habit pattern of performing good actions, it will begin to erase the patterns that keep creating guilt inside of us, and it will replace it with a kind of a higher, kind of more honest programming. And I think this is one of the biggest things to moving on from a mistake, is to do something that allows me to be aligned to my true self. So doing something right, essentially. And the last aspect that I wanted to take up was one of being in good company. And I feel this is quite an important topic, because when you're in the company of individuals that exude a peaceful vibration in a peaceful setting, that automatically lifts me, from a position of being lower consciousness, of being suffering. And that again is very helpful to lifting my spirits and beginning to do that inner work on myself. So these are some of the things that we can do at a practical and a straightforward way to start forgiving the self and to create that connection with the self. Now, I also mentioned that there was another step towards self-forgiveness. And this is where there needs to be a more, I guess, subtle and deep effort. And, the interesting thing about the deep effort is that when we keep going over our mistakes again and again, and we keep performing the same mistake again and again, then actually the mistake can turn into a habit. And when the mistake turns into a habit, no matter how hard we try, we think we can't change that. In fact, we won't have the power to change that. We believe that actually this is who I am. And I know I've done that, on many occasions on my journey, that this is just who I am because I could not change an aspect about myself. And this is where we need to get to the roots of our mistake, I feel. And sometimes the only thing that works is a complete change of attitude. I have to deeply see what mistake I'm making, and not just what mistake I'm making, the seriousness of that mistake. And when I'm able to check myself against my higher self, so when I'm in this higher state, then my inner truth begins to work for me very, very naturally, and feelings of realization will emerge very naturally. Now, I know that in a lot of the retreats that we've run at the Brahma Kumaris, an element of silence is always a big part of the retreats, but it doesn't take a huge amount of time for the soul to see truthfully. That is my experience, not just in my own efforts, but in seeing people suffering, wanting change in their lives. Within a day of just paying attention to myself, there will be some realization that takes place in the soul. And I was reading one of our, we have readings every morning at the Brahma Kumaris, but there was one particular reading that really struck me, and it said, self-realization is self-forgiveness. And that was one of the most powerful things I heard, because when we realize that we've truly made a mistake, we can be liberated from the weight of that mistake. And that's all we need to be liberated from, is the weight of that mistake, because the weight is what actually pulls us down. When that mistake sits inside of us over a long period of time, it creates heaviness in the soul. And where there is heaviness, the soul can never be light. In its true form of lightness, it cannot be in that form. And so heaviness comes, there's no smile on our face carries that heaviness. A heavy heart is present on our face. And so this is one way for us to really consider what is making us heavy. If there is feelings of heaviness, then I'm simply carrying weight from a scene. And when I release the burden of that scene, the scene will always be retained in my memory. But once the weight is released, then that scene won't pull you in your life. And this is how we can make past the past. And I'll end on this topic for the next couple of minutes, that our mistakes often define us. I know they've defined me in a big way until I've released them through self-forgiveness. But the more and the longer I've carried my mistakes and the weight of my mistakes, the heavier I've become. And when I've been free from this burden, and literally I have forgiven myself and I've released that memory, because I've remembered where I've taken sorrow, and I've realized, I've gone through that process of realization, I have truly become free. So I can still remember the memory, but that memory doesn't pull me. That memory doesn't carry weight behind it. And so this is where we can move on from our mistakes. It's not that we forget completely. No, it's that no longer begins to pull me anymore, because the weight is gone and the soul becomes light again, and the soul can move forward. And I've witnessed so many moments in retreats over the last 10, 15 years, that where there is realization. Someone's just mentioned, Ganesh has just mentioned, there's an opportunity. What can I learn from it? That's what realization brings. True realization brings liberation from learning about what I have gained and what I can truly let go of to protect myself. And so this is something I wanted to touch on, because often we don't necessarily have an outlet for all of the things that are affecting us on an internal level, we need to be able to express that and clarify that. And I know some of you have mentioned journaling. I know some of you know that I'm very keen on journaling as a topic, because it's helped me to really understand myself and understand my feelings and emotions, particularly the deeper feelings and emotions. And when you're able to write and acknowledge that, then I'm able to give myself that love. And Sister Genti of the Brahma Kumaris once said, she said, honesty is simply the start of loving myself. And I really love that comment, because that's all it is. When we're able to be honest with ourselves, then I'm able to love myself. That is a sign that I'm loving myself. So I'm going to stop there. I think we covered a number of different things today. I'm hoping there was some value and some practical things that perhaps you can take away in your own journeys. This is a never-ending topic, I feel. Even for myself, on a regular basis, I have to constantly check how much I'm evaluating myself in situations and how much am I truly observing, or using pure observation to see myself in a loving and detached way. Om Shanti. Thank you.